The carriage wheels groaned against the muddy Kentucky road as Eleanor Whitmore watched the wilderness unfold. At 23, educated in Boston, she carried only a worn satchel. Her father's debts had left her two choices: marriage to a merchant twice her age or independence through employment. The advertisement had been simple: governess needed, generous compensation. Ashford Manor emerged from the mist like a decaying monument, 3 stories of weathered brick, 12 windows staring like dead eyes. Overgrown gardens choked everything. The silent driver stopped at the circular drive, took her coins, and disappeared quickly. Eleanor lifted the iron knocker and let it fall. Minutes passed before the door opened, revealing a gaunt woman in black with sunken eyes and grey hair pulled back severely. "Miss Whitmore, I am Mrs. Cordelia Ashford. You are late." "The riverboat was delayed, ma'am. Follow me." The interior was decayed, smelling of mildew and something organic that made Eleanor's stomach turn. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Ashfords with stern, cruel expressions. Many frames held only empty canvases. "You will teach my son, Thomas," Mrs. Ashford said. "He is 12 and difficult. You are the 7th governess in 18 months. 7? What happened?" "They left. They proved unsuitable. You'll be compensated triple the standard rate for exceptional dedication." She opened a door to reveal a library with empty, mildewed shelves. A boy sat at a desk, his back to them. "Thomas, your new governess." The boy turned slowly. Thomas Ashford was small, pale, with dark eyes too old for his face. "How long will you stay?" he asked softly. "That's enough," Mrs. Ashford snapped. "Lessons begin tomorrow at 8. Thomas, to your room." Mrs. Ashford led Eleanor upstairs to a sparse room. "Water for washing. Dinner at 7 in your room. You take all meals there. Don't wander after dark. Don't enter the east wing. Don't go to the cellar. Don't speak with servants beyond necessity. Understood?" "Why these restrictions?" "For your safety. Ashford Manor is not safe for the curious." The door clicked shut. Eleanor examined her room. Scratches marked the floor, and words carved into the plaster: "Leave while you can." From the window, Eleanor saw torches moving between distant buildings, then came screaming, agonized, desperate, before cutting off abruptly. Dinner arrived with a young black woman who wouldn't meet her eyes. "What's your name?" Eleanor asked gently. The girl froze. "I ain't supposed to talk, ma'am. Please, Bessie, ma'am, but Mrs. Ashford say none of us can talk to you." "Did that scream? I didn't hear nothing, and you didn't neither. That's what you got to tell yourself to stay alive." The girl fled. Eleanor forced herself to eat, then lay awake. She dreamed of reaching hands and watching eyes. Morning came. At 8 o'clock, she found Thomas already seated. He read flawlessly, his comprehension evident. "Very good," Eleanor said. "Now, tell me about the Revolutionary War." "Independence," Thomas said. "Freedom from British tyranny. They wanted to live without a king controlling them." "And what does freedom mean to you?" Something flickered in his eyes. "Freedom is an illusion, Miss Whitmore. Those who think they're free just don't see their chains." The answer chilled her. "That's dark for someone so young. My mother says I'm a realist. She says sentimentality leads to ruin." "Do you believe some people are born to be slaves?" Eleanor's stomach tightened. "I believe all people are created equal in God's eyes. Every person has inherent worth regardless of circumstances." Thomas smiled unpleasantly. "Then you and Mother will disagree. That could be unfortunate." Mrs. Ashford entered. "How are lessons?" "Very well. Thomas is intelligent and well-read. Of course, he's an Ashford." She placed possessive hands on his shoulders. "Thomas, walk in the garden." The boy left. Mrs. Ashford moved closer. "The previous governesses all broke the rules. They became curious, went where they shouldn't, saw what they shouldn't. They left in the night without collecting wages. Why? Eleanor shook her head. Because they were weak. Because they couldn't accept southern realities. Because they had abolitionist sentiment and tried to interfere. Mrs. Ashford's voice stayed level. Are you an abolitionist, Miss Whitmore? The question hung like a noose. Eleanor knew her answer could mean life or death. I believe in freedom for all. But I'm here to teach your son, not involve myself in your private affairs. Diplomatic. Mrs. Ashford moved toward the door. Remember that. The other inhabitants aren't your concern. Don't speak to them. Don't question them. Don't fill their heads with dangerous ideas. Clear? Yes, ma'am. Good. You may hear disturbing sounds at night. Ignore them. Stay in your room with the door locked. Curiosity killed the cat. I'd hate the same fate for you. Thomas returned, looking animated. Did Mother tell you about the rules? She did. Will you follow them? What do you think? The boy smiled, that unsettling smile. I think you're like the others. Eventually you'll hear or see something you can't ignore. Then you'll go where you shouldn't, and then we'll need a new governess. Are you trying to frighten me? I'm warning you, there's a difference. He opened his book, dismissing her. Eleanor spent the morning teaching, but her mind wandered. At midday, Thomas left for lunch. Eleanor moved to the window instead of returning to her room. From here, she saw the quarters, 12 small structures where enslaved workers lived. People moved between them mechanically, several visibly injured. Thomas returned early. You're looking at the quarters. I was observing the property. You're wondering what happens there, what you heard last night. Thomas moved closer. Do you know why I limp? My father pushed me down the stairs when I was 9, broke my leg in 6 places. 2 months later, father was dead. A hunting accident, they said, but mother killed him. I heard them arguing. I heard the gunshot. Eleanor felt the ground shift. Thomas, you shouldn't. Why not? Because it's true? Everything true here is dangerous. The people in those quarters live in hell. 6 governesses came before you, and not one left alive. The room tilted. What do you mean? Your mother said... Mother lies. Miss Caroline helped a sick woman. She disappeared that night. I saw them carry something wrapped in canvas to the woods, leaving a trail of blood. Why tell me this? Because you deserve to know. Because maybe you're smarter than the others. Because maybe you'll survive. He limped to the door. Lessons are over. He left Eleanor alone in the library, her mind reeling. 6 governesses, 6 women who came to teach a boy and never left. She thought about the warning scratched into her wall, about Bessie's fear, about Mrs. Ashford's cold threats, and she thought about what Thomas had said, that not one of them left alive. She had to escape. She had to find a way out of Ashford Manor before she became the 7th victim. But she had no money, no means of transportation, and nowhere to go. And something else troubled her. Thomas's revelation about the enslaved people suffering in those quarters. Could she really run away and leave them to their fate? That night, Eleanor lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the house. The wind howled around the eaves. Floorboards creaked and settled, and then around midnight she heard it again, screaming, desperate and agonized, coming from somewhere on the grounds. It went on longer this time, rising and falling in waves of torment, before finally stopping with an abruptness that suggested unconsciousness or death. Eleanor got out of bed and moved to the window. She could see torchlight in the distance, figures moving between the buildings, and then she saw something that made her blood run cold. Mrs. Ashford, standing in the yard, watching as 2 large men dragged someone, into one of the larger buildings. Even from this distance, Eleanor could see the trail they left behind, dark against the pale dirt. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Thomas hadn't been lying. This was a place of horror, of torture, of systematic cruelty, and she was trapped here, complicit by her silence, another governess who would turn a blind eye or end up like the others. No, she wouldn't be silent. She wouldn't be complicit. Whatever the cost, she had to do something. The next morning, Eleanor waited until she knew Mrs. Ashford would be occupied with household matters. Then she left the main house through a side door and made her way toward the quarters. The November air was cold and damp, heavy with the smell of wood smoke and something else, something organic and foul. She was halfway across the yard when a voice stopped her. "Miss Whitmore, you are not permitted in this area." Eleanor turned to find a large man blocking her path. He was white, middle-aged, with a bull-like build and a face marked by smallpox scars. His hand rested on a whip coiled at his belt. "I am the governess here," Eleanor said, trying to sound authoritative. "I have the right to walk the grounds. You have the right to do what Mrs. Ashford tells you to do, nothing more." The man, who she assumed was the overseer, moved closer. "She said you might try something like this. She said you had that look about you, that abolitionist look. Best turn around and go back to the house before you see something you can't unsee. What happens in those buildings? What did I hear last night?" The overseer smiled, revealing brown, broken teeth. "You heard discipline. You heard what happens when property forgets its place. Now I'm going to ask you once more, real polite-like, to return to the house. If you refuse, Mrs. Ashford has given me permission to escort you, and I promise you won't enjoy my methods of escort." Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to scream, to fight, to do something. But she was one woman against this man, against Mrs. Ashford, against the entire sick system that allowed such cruelty to flourish. If she tried to fight now, she would only end up like the other governesses, wrapped in canvas and buried in the woods. She turned and walked back to the house, feeling the overseer's eyes on her back the entire way. When she reached her room, she found Bessie waiting with breakfast. The girl's face was puffy and bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut. "Bessie, what happened?" "Nothing, ma'am. I fell." But the girl's hands shook so badly the dishes rattled on the tray. Eleanor gently took the tray and set it aside. "Bessie, please, tell me the truth. Did someone hurt you?" Tears began to stream down the girl's face. "Mr. Pike, the overseer, he say I took extra food from the kitchen. I didn't, I swear I didn't, but he don't believe me. He took me to the shed last night and—" She couldn't continue, her whole body shaking with sobs. "The shed? Is that where I heard the screaming?" Bessie nodded miserably. "That's where they take us when we done wrong. That's where Mr. Pike does his work. He got all kinds of tools in there, all kinds of ways to make it hurt. And Mrs. Ashford, she watches sometimes. She say it's necessary. She say we got to be kept in line or we forget our place." Eleanor felt rage building inside her, hot and consuming. "How many people work here, Bessie?" 23 of us, ma'am. Used to be more, but some died. Some tried to run and got caught and killed. Now we just try to survive. And the governesses who came before me, what happened to them?" Bessie's good eye widened with fear. "I can't tell you that, ma'am. Mrs. Ashford, she say anyone who talks about that will join them." "Please, Bessie, I need to know." The girl was quiet for a long moment, warring with herself. Finally, in a whisper so soft Eleanor could barely hear it, she spoke. "The first one, Miss Caroline, she tried to help us. She gave medicine, taught some of the children to read in secret. Mrs. Ashford found out. They took Miss Caroline to the shed, and we heard her screaming all night. In the morning she was gone. The second one, Miss Martha, she lasted only a week before she tried to run. Mr. Pike caught her on the road. They dragged her back and—" Bessie's voice broke. "They made us watch what they did to her, as a lesson, to show us what happens to people who try to leave." Eleanor felt sick. "And the others?" "All dead, ma'am. Some lasted longer than others, but they all ended up the same way. Because they tried to help us, or because they tried to leave, or because they learned too much about what happens here. Mrs. Ashford, she can't let anyone leave who knows the truth. She can't risk them telling the authorities. But surely someone in town must know what's happening here. Bessie shook her head. The Ashfords own half the county. The sheriff, the mayor, the judge, they all owe their positions to Ashford money. Nobody wants to look too close at what happens on this property, and the few who might care, well, they just see us as property anyway. Our lives don't matter to them. Eleanor took the girl's hands gently. Your lives matter to me, Bessie. What's happening here is evil, and someone needs to stop it. No, ma'am. Bessie pulled her hands away, fear written across her battered face. You can't help us. You'll just get yourself killed and nothing will change. Please, Miss Whitmore, just do your job. Teach Master Thomas. Keep your head down. Maybe if you're lucky, maybe if you don't cause no trouble, she'll let you live. Is that really what you think? That if I cooperate, if I turn a blind eye to torture and murder, Mrs. Ashford will simply let me go? Bessie wouldn't meet her eyes. I think you got a choice. You can try to be a hero and die like the others, or you can try to survive. Either way, we'll still be here. We'll still be slaves. Nothing you do will change that. The girl fled, leaving Eleanor alone with her breakfast and her despair. Bessie was right about one thing. Eleanor couldn't stop what was happening at Ashford Manor through direct confrontation. She was one woman against a powerful family with connections throughout the county. If she went to the authorities, they would side with Mrs. Ashford. If she tried to free the enslaved people, she would be caught and killed. But there had to be another way. There had to be something she could do. That afternoon, during lessons, Eleanor studied Thomas more carefully. The boy was clearly intelligent, clearly perceptive. He had warned her about his mother, told her the truth about the other governesses, but he also seemed to accept the cruelty around him as normal, even necessary. His father had broken his leg, his mother had killed his father, and yet he spoke of these things as if they were simple facts of life, neither good nor bad. Thomas, she said during a break in their studies, do you ever feel troubled by what happens here? By how your mother treats the enslaved people? He looked up from his book with that unsettling, too adult gaze. Troubled? Why would I be troubled? Because they're human beings, because they suffer. Everything suffers, Miss Whitmore. Animals suffer. Plants wither and die. That's the nature of existence. The strong survive by making the weak serve them. It's always been that way. But it doesn't have to be that way. We have the power to choose compassion over cruelty, freedom over slavery. Thomas closed his book carefully. My mother says that compassion is a luxury only the strong can afford, and then only when it serves their interests. She says that if the enslaved people were ever freed, they would turn on us, kill us, burn this house to the ground. She says that violence is the only thing they understand. Your mother is wrong, Eleanor said firmly. People who are treated with cruelty learn cruelty, but people who are treated with kindness, with dignity, with respect, they learn those things too. The violence here isn't coming from the enslaved people, Thomas. It's coming from your mother. For a moment, something flickered in the boy's dark eyes, something that might have been doubt or hope or fear. But then it was gone, shuttered behind that practiced indifference. You sound like the others, he said quietly, like Miss Caroline and Miss Martha and all the rest. They said things like that. They thought they could change things. And look what happened to them. What happened to them was murder, Thomas. Your mother is a murderer. I know. His voice was so soft she almost didn't hear it. But she's also the only family I have. And if you make her choose between protecting this place and protecting you, she'll choose this place every time. So please, Miss Whitmore, just stop talking about freedom and compassion and all those dangerous ideas. Just teach me mathematics and history and keep your head down. I don't want to lose another governess. The vulnerability in his voice caught Eleanor off guard. Despite his cold exterior, despite the terrible things he'd grown up witnessing, Thomas was still a child a damaged, traumatized child who'd learned to survive by suppressing his empathy and accepting the unacceptable. "All right," Eleanor said gently. "We'll speak of it no more during lessons. But Thomas, I want you to remember something. What your mother does, what she's taught you to accept, it's not normal. It's not right. And someday, when you're grown, you'll have the power to make different choices." "Will I?" Thomas looked at her with such desolation that her heart ached. "Or will I just become her, another Ashford, perpetuating the same cruelties generation after generation, because that's all we know how to be?" Eleanor had no answer for him. The question hung in the air between them until the lesson bell rang and Thomas gathered his books and left, his limp seeming more pronounced than usual. That evening, Eleanor made a decision. She couldn't leave Ashford Manor, not yet, not without money and not without doing something to help the people trapped here. But she also couldn't directly confront Mrs. Ashford or try to free the enslaved people, not without getting herself and them killed. What she could do was gather evidence, document what was happening here, and somehow, some way, get that evidence to someone who could help, someone beyond Mrs. Ashford's influence. She began that night. Using the thin notebook she'd brought for lesson planning, she started to write. She wrote down everything Bessie had told her, everything Thomas had revealed, everything she'd witnessed. She wrote down names, dates, descriptions. She wrote until her hand cramped and her candle burned low, until she'd created a record of the horrors of Ashford Manor. But where could she hide such a document? Mrs. Ashford or her servants might search her room at any time. And how could she get it out of the house, to someone who would believe her and have the power to act? The answer came to her as she was putting away her writing supplies. The library, the vast, decaying library, with its thousands of mouldering books that no one read anymore. She could hide her pages inside one of those books, tucked away in some forgotten volume on a high shelf. And if she could find a way to send word to someone outside the county, someone with influence who might investigate. It was a desperate plan, full of holes and dependent on luck. But it was all she had. Over the next few days, Eleanor settled into a routine. She taught Thomas in the mornings and afternoons, always careful to avoid topics that might anger Mrs. Ashford. She took her meals in her room, speaking only minimally with Bessie when the girl brought food. She stayed away from the windows at night, closing her curtains and trying not to hear the screams that still came with terrible regularity. But she also gathered information. She memorized the schedule of the house when Mrs. Ashford met with her overseer when the other servants were occupied. She befriended the elderly cook, a free black woman named Maud, who'd worked at the manor for 40 years by complimenting her food and asking about recipes. Slowly, carefully, she learned more about the property, about the people trapped there, about Mrs. Ashford's habits and weaknesses. She learned that Mrs. Ashford had inherited the plantation from her father, not her husband, that she'd married young to a man as cruel as she was, and that they'd built their fortune on cotton and tobacco and human misery, that her husband really had died in what the authorities ruled a hunting accident, though everyone who worked at the manor knew the truth, that Mrs. Ashford had become even more ruthless after his death, as if freed from even the minimal constraints his presence had imposed. She learned that the shed, the place of torture, had once been a tobacco barn, that Mrs. Ashford had it specially modified with chains, restraints, and implements of torment, that she sometimes spent hours there, watching as Mr. Pike worked, her face expressionless as people screamed and bled. And she learned about the previous governesses, Caroline, 24, from Philadelphia, who'd lasted 3 months before trying to give medicine to a sick slave and being taken to the shed. Martha, 19, from Boston, who'd lasted only a week before attempting to run and being caught on the road. Elizabeth, 27, from New York, who'd lasted 2 months before being discovered teaching enslaved children to read in secret. Anne, 22, from Virginia, who'd lasted 4 months before trying to poison Mrs. Ashford's tea. And 2 others, whose names no one remembered, who'd come and gone so quickly they'd barely made an impression. All of them had tried to help. All of them had died for it. Eleanor wrote everything down, hiding her papers in the library inside a water-damaged copy of Plutarch's Lives on a top shelf. Each night she added more details, more evidence, building a case against Mrs. Ashford that no one could ignore. She was adding a new entry one evening, 3 weeks after her arrival, when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside the library. She quickly slid the book back into place and turned to find Mrs. Ashford standing in the doorway. "Miss Whitmore, working late this evening?" "I was preparing tomorrow's lessons, ma'am." Eleanor's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "How are Thomas's studies progressing?" "Very well. He's an exceptional student." "Yes, he is an Ashford after all." Mrs. Ashford moved into the room, her long black dress rustling like dead leaves. "I wanted to discuss something with you. It's been 3 weeks since you arrived. You are the first governess to last this long without incident." "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me. It's not a compliment." Mrs. Ashford's cold eyes studied her. "It concerns me, actually. The others all showed their true colors within a week or 2. They tried to interfere, tried to leave, tried to sabotage my household. But you've done none of these things, which makes me wonder what you're planning." Eleanor forced herself to meet that penetrating gaze. "I'm not planning anything, Mrs. Ashford. I'm simply trying to do my job and earn my salary." "Are you?" Mrs. Ashford moved closer. "Or are you biding your time, gathering information, making plans to run or to betray me?" "I would never betray you, ma'am." "Wouldn't you?" Mrs. Ashford's hand shot out and grabbed Eleanor's wrist with surprising strength. "I've seen the way you look at the servants, with pity, with sympathy. I know what you are, Miss Whitmore. You're one of those northern abolitionists full of sentimental notions about the equality of the races. You think I'm evil. You think what I do here is wrong. I think," Eleanor said carefully, "that how you run your household is your business, not mine." A diplomatic answer, just like before. Mrs. Ashford released her wrist. "Let me tell you something, Miss Whitmore. I've killed 3 women in this house, women who thought they could undermine my authority, who thought they could free my property or expose me to the authorities. I killed them slowly, carefully, making sure they understood the price of interference before they died. And I would kill you just as easily if you gave me reason." "Then why haven't you?" The question escaped before Eleanor could stop it. Mrs. Ashford smiled, a horrible expression that held no warmth. "Because Thomas likes you. Because he's made better progress in his studies with you than with any of the others. Because you're useful. But the moment you stop being useful, the moment you cross the line from teacher to troublemaker, I will have Mr. Pike take you to the shed, and you will never leave." She turned and walked out, leaving Eleanor shaking with rage and fear. Mrs. Ashford knew. She suspected, at least, that Eleanor was documenting what was happening here, which meant Eleanor was running out of time. That night, as she lay in bed unable to sleep, Eleanor made her decision. She had to get her evidence out of the manor. She had to find a way to send it to someone who could help, even if it meant risking everything. But who and how? The answer came from an unexpected source. The next morning, during lessons, Thomas mentioned that a traveling merchant would be arriving the following week to deliver supplies. The merchant, a man named Abernathy, came 4 times a year from Louisville and was one of the few outsiders who regularly visited the manor. "Does Mr. Abernathy ever carry messages?" Eleanor asked casually. Thomas looked at her sharply. "Why do you ask?" "I was hoping to send a letter to my aunt in Boston to let her know I'm well. There's a postal office in town. Mother sends one of the servants there once a month. Yes, but I thought perhaps Mr. Abernathy might be able to post it in Louisville, where the service is more reliable. Thomas was quiet for a moment. My mother reads all the mail that goes out from this house. She has Mr. Pike intercept anything that seems suspicious. I see. Eleanor's hope deflated. But, Thomas continued slowly, Mr. Abernathy is an honourable man. If you were to give him something directly, without Mother's knowledge, I believe he would deliver it as asked, for a price, of course. Eleanor looked at the boy, surprised. Are you suggesting I secretly pass a letter to this merchant? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply stating facts. But there was something in his expression, something almost like complicity. Mr. Abernathy usually conducts his business in the morning and takes his midday meal in the kitchen before leaving. Mother never joins him. She finds his conversation tedious, and I am usually having my own meal at that time, leaving the kitchen empty except for Maud and the merchant. It was as clear an invitation as Thomas could give without openly betraying his mother. He was telling Eleanor how she could get her evidence out of the house, but why would he help her when his loyalty should be to his family? As if reading her thoughts, Thomas spoke again. Miss Whitmore, do you believe people can change, that someone raised in cruelty can learn compassion? Yes, Eleanor said firmly. I believe that absolutely. Even if everyone around them tells them that compassion is weakness, that kindness is foolishness. Especially then, because it takes more strength to choose kindness in a cruel world than to simply perpetuate the cruelty. Thomas nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd suspected. Mr. Abernathy arrives next Thursday. He usually arrives around 9 and stays until early afternoon, just so you know. He returned to his studies, and Eleanor felt a surge of hope. She had 1 week to finalize her documentation, to write a letter to someone who might have the authority and willingness to investigate the Ashford plantation. 1 week to prepare her evidence. 1 week before she made her move and either succeeded or joined the 6 governesses buried in the woods. Eleanor spent the next 7 days in a fever of activity. She added final details to her account, making sure to include specific dates, names, and descriptions. She drew a simple map of the property, marking the locations of the quarters, the shed, and the likely burial sites in the woods. She wrote a letter to a prominent abolitionist lawyer in Philadelphia, whose name she'd read about in newspapers, explaining the situation and begging for investigation and intervention. She was careful. So careful. She never let her guard down around Mrs. Ashford or Mr. Pike. She continued to teach Thomas as if nothing had changed. She ate her meals, did her work, maintained the facade of the compliant governess. But underneath, her every thought was focused on Thursday. Wednesday night, she couldn't sleep at all. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the house, thinking about all the ways her plan could fail. What if Mr. Abernathy refused to help? What if he told Mrs. Ashford? What if she was caught before she could even approach him? What if her letter was intercepted, her evidence destroyed? But she had to try. The faces of the enslaved people haunted her, especially Bessie with her bruised face and haunted eyes. 6 governesses had died here, and how many enslaved people? How many had been beaten, tortured, killed, with no one to speak for them, no one to demand justice? If Eleanor died trying to expose this evil, at least she would die for something that mattered. At least she would have tried. Thursday morning arrived cold and grey, with a light snow beginning to fall. Eleanor dressed carefully, hiding her folded documents and letter in the pocket of her dress. She taught Thomas as usual, though her hands shook and she could barely focus on the lessons. The boy noticed, of course, but said nothing, just watched her with those dark, knowing eyes. At 11:30, Eleanor heard the sound of a wagon arriving. Her heart began to race. She waited until Mrs. Ashford left the library to greet the merchant, then counted to 100 slowly before telling Thomas she needed to visit the necessary for a few minutes. The boy nodded. "Take your time, Miss Whitmore, and good luck." She left the library and made her way toward the kitchen, forcing herself to walk calmly even though every instinct screamed at her to run. She could hear Mrs. Ashford's voice from the front of the house, discussing supplies with the merchant. She had only minutes before the business was concluded, and Mr. Abernathy came to the kitchen for his meal. Eleanor reached the kitchen to find Maud alone, stirring a pot of stew. The old woman looked up, her eyes widening slightly when she saw Eleanor. "You shouldn't be here, child," Maud said quietly. "I know, but I need to ask you something. Mr. Abernathy, can he be trusted?" Maud's weathered face was unreadable. Trusted with what? With information about what happens here, with evidence that could bring the authorities. For a long moment, Maud said nothing. Then, "Mr. Abernathy is a businessman. He don't involve himself in politics or moral questions, but he's an honest businessman. If you pay him to deliver something, he'll deliver it, and he don't talk about his client's business. How much would he charge? Every coin you got, most like. He knows the risk he'd be taking." Eleanor pulled out the small purse containing the wages Mrs. Ashford had paid her so far. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. "Will you help me?" Maud looked at the purse, then at Eleanor's face. "You know what'll happen if Mrs. Ashford finds out?" "Yes, and you're willing to take that risk, for people you barely know, for slaves who ain't your concern. They are my concern. Every person in bondage is my concern. This evil has to be stopped." Maud's eyes filled with tears. "You sound like Miss Caroline. She said things like that right before they took her to the shed." "I know, but if I do nothing, if I just keep teaching Thomas and turning a blind eye, then I'm as guilty as Mrs. Ashford, and I won't be that person." The old woman was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. "When Mr. Abernathy comes for his meal, I'll call him into the pantry. Say I need help reaching something on a high shelf. That'll give you a minute or two to talk with him private-like. But after that you're on your own. I got grandchildren in those quarters, and I can't risk them for nobody." "I understand. Thank you, Maud." Eleanor retreated to a shadowy corner of the kitchen as footsteps approached. Mrs. Ashford's voice preceded Mr. Abernathy into the room. "And I'll need twice the usual order of flour and sugar," she was saying. "With winter coming, we need to ensure adequate provisions." "Of course, Mrs. Ashford. I'll have it delivered within the fortnight." The merchant's voice was deep and gravelly, the voice of a man who'd spent years on the road. "Excellent. Maud will provide you with a meal. I have other matters to attend to." Mrs. Ashford swept out, her dress whispering against the floor. Mr. Abernathy was a large man, probably 50, with a salt-and-pepper beard and shrewd blue eyes that missed nothing. He caught sight of Eleanor in her corner and raised an eyebrow. "And who might you be?" Before Eleanor could answer, Maud spoke up. "That's Miss Whitmore, the new governess. Mr. Abernathy, could you help me with something in the pantry? These old bones can't reach the high shelves like they used to." The merchant nodded and followed Maud into the pantry. Eleanor waited until they were both inside, then moved quickly to the doorway. Maud caught her eye, nodded once, and slipped out, leaving Eleanor alone with Mr. Abernathy. "Mr. Abernathy," Eleanor said in a low, urgent voice, "I need your help." The merchant's eyes narrowed. "I don't get involved in household disputes, miss. This isn't a dispute. This is evidence of torture, murder, and human trafficking. I need you to deliver documents to an abolitionist lawyer in Philadelphia." She pulled out her papers and letter. "Please, people are dying here. If you won't help them, at least help me. I'm the 7th governess Mrs. Ashford has hired. The other 6 are buried in the woods." Mr. Abernathy's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. He took the papers, glancing through them quickly. Eleanor watched his face grow pale as he read. "Good God," he whispered. "I knew the Ashfords were strict, but this is barbarism. Will you deliver them?" "Ah, do you have any idea what you're asking? If Mrs. Ashford finds out I helped you, she'll have me killed. The Ashfords own this county, miss. They have the sheriff, the magistrate, everyone who matters in their pocket. That's why I need you to take it to Philadelphia, outside their reach. Please, Mr. Abernathy, if you won't do it out of compassion, do it for the money." She pressed her purse into his hands. He weighed the purse, then looked at the papers again. Something shifted in his face. "My father was a Quaker," he said quietly. "He believed slavery was a sin against God and man. I haven't always lived up to his principles, but He tucked the papers inside his coat. "I'll deliver them to your lawyer in Philadelphia. But you need to understand, miss, it'll take weeks for any investigation to start, if it starts at all. Can you survive that long here?" "I have to try." "Then may God watch over you." He pocketed the purse as well. "And if I were you, I'd start planning an escape route. Because when those documents reach Philadelphia, when questions start being asked, Mrs. Ashford will know it was you, and she'll come for you." He left the pantry, sat down at the kitchen table, and made a show of eating Maud's stew as if nothing had happened. Eleanor slipped out the back way, returning to the library before her absence could be noted. Thomas looked up when she entered. "Did you succeed?" "Yes." "Good." He returned to his book. "Mother will be furious when she finds out." "I know." "She'll probably kill you." "I know that too." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Was it worth it, risking your life for people you barely know? Eleanor sat down beside him. "Thomas, there are things in this world worth dying for. Freedom is one of them. Justice is another. And if my death brings even a little justice to the people suffering here, then yes, it was worth it." The boy's eyes were wet, though he didn't let the tears fall. "I wish I could be as brave as you." "You are brave, Thomas. You helped me today, even though you knew the risk. That took real courage. Or stupidity." But he almost smiled. "Miss Whitmore, when things go wrong, when Mother finds out, hide in the cellar. She thinks you won't go there because she forbade it, so she'll search everywhere else first. That might buy you enough time for help to arrive." "Thank you, Thomas." They resumed their lessons, but Eleanor's mind was elsewhere. Mr. Abernathy would reach Philadelphia in a week or so, would deliver her papers to the lawyer. And then what? Would the lawyer believe her? Would he have the influence to launch an investigation? Or would her documents end up filed away and forgotten? Another piece of evidence of Southern cruelty that Northern authorities chose to ignore. The days passed with excruciating slowness. Eleanor continued her routine, teaching Thomas, taking her meals, sleeping fitfully. Mrs. Ashford watched her more closely now, as if she sensed something had changed but said nothing. The screaming from the shed continued nightly, a regular horror that Eleanor had learned to dread but no longer felt surprised by. 2 weeks after Mr. Abernathy's visit, everything changed. Eleanor was in the library with Thomas, working through a Latin translation, when Mrs. Ashford entered. Her face was pale, her mouth compressed into a thin line. "Thomas, go to your room." The boy obeyed immediately, casting one worried glance at Eleanor before disappearing. Mrs. Ashford closed the door behind him and turned to face Eleanor. "Mr. Pike received a visitor this morning," she said, her voice deadly calm. "A federal marshal, asking questions about conditions on this property, asking about reports of abuse, torture and murder, asking about 6 missing governesses." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. It had worked. Her documents had reached the right people. Help was coming, but it had happened too soon, before she could prepare, before she could escape. "I see," she managed to say. "Do you?" Mrs. Ashford moved closer. I convinced the marshal that these were malicious rumors spread by abolition agitators trying to stir up trouble. I showed him my well-fed, well-clothed workers. I explained that the governesses all left of their own accord, taking positions elsewhere. I charmed him, reassured him, sent him on his way. But he'll be back with more questions, and eventually someone will come who isn't so easily persuaded. Good, Eleanor said, finding courage she didn't know she possessed, because what you're doing here is evil, and you deserve to be exposed. Mrs. Ashford's hand moved faster than Eleanor could react, striking her across the face hard enough to knock her to the ground. Pain exploded through Eleanor's skull, and she tasted blood. "You sanctimonious little fool," Mrs. Ashford hissed. "You think you're a hero. You think you've saved anyone. All you've done is ensure that I have to be more careful, more thorough, that I have to eliminate any witnesses, any evidence, starting with you." She opened the door and called out, "Mr. Pike, bring rope and take Miss Whitmore to the shed. It's time she learned what happens to people who betray the Ashfords." The overseer appeared, his scarred face splitting into a grin. "My pleasure, Mrs. Ashford." Eleanor scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. She had to run, had to reach the cellar like Thomas had advised. But Mr. Pike was between her and the door, and he was already pulling rope from his belt. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, miss," he said. "Come quiet-like and I'll go easy on you. Scream and fight and I'll make it last for days." Eleanor's eyes darted around the library, looking for a weapon, an escape route, anything. Her gaze fell on a heavy brass candlestick on a nearby shelf. She grabbed it and swung with all her strength. The candlestick connected with Mr. Pike's temple with a sickening crunch. The overseer staggered, blood streaming down his face, and Eleanor didn't wait to see if he'd fall. She ran. She bolted from the library, hearing Mrs. Ashford's screams behind her. "Stop her! Don't let her reach the main road." Eleanor's feet pounded down the corridor, her heart hammering. She knew the house's layout now, knew where the cellar door was. She just had to reach it before they caught her. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with Bessie. The girl's eyes widened. "The cellar," Eleanor gasped. "Where's the key?" "Hanging in the kitchen, but Miss Whitmore—" "No time. Hide, Bessie, and when the authorities come back, tell them everything." Eleanor ran toward the kitchen, her lungs burning. Behind her she heard Mr. Pike's roar of rage and the sound of running footsteps. She burst into the kitchen, startling Maud, and grabbed the ring of keys from its hook. The cellar, child. Maud's eyes were wide with fear. "That's no place to hide. It's the only place." Eleanor clutched the keys and ran back into the corridor. The cellar door was old, thick wood bound with iron. Eleanor fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get them into the lock. She could hear Mr. Pike getting closer, his heavy boots like thunder. The lock clicked. Eleanor yanked the door open and plunged into darkness, pulling the door shut behind her and locking it from the inside. Immediately, fists pounded on the wood. "You can't hide forever, miss!" Mr. Pike's voice was muffled but clear. "We'll break this door down if we have to." Eleanor descended the stairs into the blackness, feeling her way along the wall. The cellar smelled of earth and mold and something else, something that made her stomach turn. At the bottom of the stairs, dim light filtered through a small window set high in the wall. As her eyes adjusted, Eleanor saw why Mrs. Ashford had forbidden anyone from entering this place. The cellar was a tomb. 6 bodies lay in a row along the far wall, wrapped in canvas, but not buried. Eleanor recognized one of the bundles because a hand had worked free of the wrapping. A pale hand that wore a copper ring. 6 governesses, exactly as Thomas and Bessie had said. Mrs. Ashford had kept them here, preserved them like trophies. Eleanor's legs gave out and she sank to the cold earth floor, horror washing over her in waves. This was where she would die. This was where she would join them, the 7th victim of Ashford Manor. Upstairs, the pounding continued. She could hear Mrs. Ashford's voice now, shrill with rage, ordering servants to find an axe, to break down the door. How long did she have? Minutes? An hour? Eleanor crawled to the small window and peered out. From this angle, she could just see the road that led away from the manor, and in the distance she saw something that made hope spark in her chest. Riders approaching. At least a dozen men on horseback. The marshal had returned, and he'd brought reinforcements. "They're coming!" Eleanor shouted up toward the locked door. "The authorities are coming! You can't hide what you've done anymore!" The pounding stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then Mrs. Ashford's voice, cold and clear. "Then I'll simply have to make sure there are no witnesses. Mr. Pike, burn the cellar. Burn it with her inside." Eleanor's hope turned to ash. She looked around frantically, searching for another way out, but there was only the one door and one small window, too high to reach and too small to crawl through, even if she could. She heard movement above, the sound of liquid being poured. Oil. They were going to burn her alive. The window. She had to try the window. Eleanor looked around desperately for something to stand on, something to boost her up. She spotted a wooden crate in the corner and dragged it beneath the window. Standing on it, she could just reach the sill. The window was latched from the outside, but the wood was old and rotten. Eleanor slammed her fist against the glass. Once, twice. On the third strike, the window shattered, cutting her hand. She ignored the pain and reached through, fumbling for the latch. Her fingers found it just as smoke began to seep under the cellar door. The window swung open. It was small, barely large enough for her to squeeze through, but it was her only chance. She pulled herself up, ignoring the broken glass cutting into her arms, ignoring the smoke that was growing thicker by the second. Behind her, flames crackled as the fire spread. The cellar was filling with smoke, making it hard to breathe, hard to see. Eleanor got her head and shoulders through the window, then her torso. For a horrible moment, she thought she was stuck, thought she would die wedged in this tiny space, but she twisted, kicked, scraped her hips raw against the frame and finally pulled herself through. She fell onto the cold ground outside, gasping for air. The riders were closer now, close enough that she could see their faces. The federal marshal was in the lead, and beside him rode a man in an expensive coat who could only be a judge or prosecutor. Eleanor tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. She collapsed back to the ground, coughing, bleeding, watching as the riders reached the front of the manor, watching as Mrs. Ashford appeared on the front steps, her face a mask of aristocratic composure. "Gentlemen," Mrs. Ashford said, her voice carrying across the yard, "to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" The marshal dismounted. "Cordelia Ashford, you are under arrest for the murders of 6 women and for the torture and abuse of enslaved persons. We have written testimony documenting your crimes, and we have orders to search these premises and interview all residents." Mrs. Ashford's composure cracked, just slightly. Her eyes darted to where smoke was beginning to rise from the cellar. "I don't know what lies you've been told, Marshal, but I assure you we've also been informed that your current governess, Miss Eleanor Whitmore, may be in immediate danger. Where is she?" She left. This morning. She took her wages and departed without notice." "That's not true." Eleanor found her voice rough from smoke. She pulled herself to her feet and staggered around the side of the house into the yard. "I'm here, and I can testify to everything I wrote in those documents, everything and more." Mrs. Ashford's face twisted with pure hatred. "You should have died with the others. But I didn't, and now everyone will know what you are." The next hours passed in a blur. The marshal's men put out the cellar fire and brought up the 6 bodies, identifying them through the belongings they'd been buried with. They interviewed Bessie, Maud, and other enslaved workers, taking detailed testimonies of abuse and murder. They arrested Mr. Pike, who tried to run and was caught before he reached the woods. And they arrested Mrs. Ashford, who maintained her composure even as she was placed in chains. Eleanor sat on the front steps, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, watching it all unfold. A doctor examined her injuries, cleaning and bandaging her cuts, treating her for smoke inhalation. He said she was lucky to be alive. Thomas appeared at some point, his face unreadable. He sat down beside Eleanor, not quite touching her. "Will they hang her?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. Probably." "Good." His voice was barely a whisper. "She killed my father. She killed those women. She tortured people for no reason except that she could. She deserves to hang." Eleanor looked at the boy, at this damaged child who'd grown up in a house of horrors. "What will happen to you, Thomas?" "I have an uncle in Virginia. He's written before, offering to take me if anything should happen to Mother. I suppose I'll go there." "Will he be kind to you?" "I don't know, but he can't be worse than her." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Miss Whitmore, thank you for being brave enough to do what the others couldn't, for stopping this." "I had help," Eleanor said, touching his shoulder gently. "From you, from Bessie and Maud and Mr. Abernathy. Evil only flourishes when good people do nothing, Thomas. Remember that." The marshal approached them, his expression grave. "Miss Whitmore will need your full testimony, and will need you to testify at the trial." "Of course. But first, what will happen to the people who were enslaved here? Will they be freed? The property will be seized and sold to pay for Mrs. Ashford's legal expenses and the costs of her trial. As for the enslaved workers—" The marshal shifted uncomfortably. "Kentucky is still a slave state, miss. They'll be sold along with the rest of the property." Eleanor felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "No, that can't be. After everything they've suffered, after everything they've survived, they can't simply be sold to another plantation. I'm sorry, but that's the law. I have no authority to free them." Eleanor turned to the judge who'd accompanied the marshal. "Is there no way? No legal recourse?" The judge, an elderly man with kind eyes, shook his head. "Not unless someone purchases them with the intention of manumission. But the cost would be substantial. 23 people at current market rates." He did the calculation in his head. Roughly $30,000. A fortune. More money than Eleanor would earn in 10 lifetimes. More money than she could ever hope to raise. But then Thomas spoke up. "I have money." Everyone turned to stare at him. The boy's face was set with determination. "My grandfather left me a trust fund when he died. It comes to me when I turn 18, but my mother had access to it as my guardian. $30,000 is approximately what's in the fund. If I request early access for a legitimate purpose, and if my uncle agrees as my new guardian, the bank will release the funds." "Thomas," Eleanor breathed. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." The boy stood, his limp making him rock slightly but not diminishing his resolve. "My family built their fortune on slavery, on cruelty, on the suffering of innocent people. The least I can do is use that blood money to buy their freedom. It's what my grandfather would have wanted, I think. He fought in the Revolution. He believed in liberty." The judge studied the boy. "That's a very mature decision for someone your age, son." "I'm not that young anymore," Thomas said quietly. "This house made sure of that." Over the following weeks, Eleanor watched as justice slowly unfolded. Mrs. Ashford went to trial, where Eleanor and dozens of other witnesses testified to her crimes. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts: 6 counts of murder, multiple counts of assault and torture, and numerous violations of what minimal laws existed to protect enslaved people from excessive brutality. She was sentenced to hang, though her lawyers immediately filed appeals. Mr. Pike also stood trial and was convicted. Unlike Mrs. Ashford, his execution was swift. He hanged on a cold January morning, showing no remorse to the end. Ashford Manor itself was sold at auction, purchased by a Philadelphia merchant who planned to tear it down and rebuild. The proceeds went to settling Mrs. Ashford's debts and to compensation for the families of the murdered governesses. And true to his word, Thomas arranged for the purchase and manumission of all 23 enslaved workers. Eleanor stood with him at the courthouse when the papers were signed, when they each received their freedom papers, when they could finally walk away from Ashford Manor as free people. Bessie cried when Eleanor handed her the document. "I never thought I'd live to see this day. Never thought I'd be free." "You're free now," Eleanor said, hugging the girl. "You all are. Free to go where you want, to build the lives you choose." "What about you, Miss Whitmore?" Bessie asked. "Where will you go?" Eleanor had thought about this often over the past weeks. She couldn't return to Boston, couldn't go back to being a governess in some comfortable northern household, not after everything she'd witnessed. She'd changed too much, seen too much. Philadelphia, she decided. I'm going to work with the Abolitionist Society there, help other enslaved people find freedom, document other places like Ashford Manor, and bring them to light. There's so much work to be done. "You're a good person, Miss Whitmore," Bessie said, "a real hero." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I'm just someone who did what any decent person should do when confronted with evil. The real heroes are you, and Maud, and all the others who survived this nightmare, who stayed strong even when hope seemed lost, who kept your humanity in a place designed to destroy it." Thomas left for Virginia a week later. Eleanor went with him to the train station, helping him with his small bag of belongings. "Will you write to me?" he asked. "Of course, and you write to me too. Tell me how you're doing, what you're learning. Miss Whitmore, do you think I can change? Do you think I can be different from her?" Eleanor knelt so she was at eye level with him. "Thomas, you're already different. You chose compassion over cruelty. You chose justice over comfort. You gave up your inheritance to free people you'd been taught to think of as property. That took courage and character. Never doubt that you have the power to choose who you become." The boy hugged her suddenly, fiercely. "Thank you for teaching me that, for showing me that there's another way to be." Eleanor watched the train pull away, carrying Thomas toward an uncertain but hopefully better future. Then she purchased her own ticket to Philadelphia and began the next chapter of her life. Over the following years, Eleanor became a prominent figure in the abolitionist movement. She testified before Congress about conditions on Kentucky plantations. She wrote articles documenting the cruelties of slavery. She helped establish a network for smuggling enslaved people to freedom. And she never forgot the lessons she'd learned at Ashford Manor, that evil flourishes in darkness, that silence is complicity, and that one person's courage can change lives. Mrs. Cordelia Ashford hanged on a spring morning in 1840, her appeals exhausted, her crimes judged too heinous for clemency. Eleanor did not attend the execution. She felt no joy in the woman's death, only sadness for all the lives destroyed by her cruelty. Thomas wrote to Eleanor regularly for many years. He became a doctor, dedicating his life to helping the poor and vulnerable. He never married, never had children, determined that the Ashford line would end with him. In every letter, he thanked Eleanor for saving him, for showing him that he could choose a different path than the one his family had walked for generations. And sometimes, late at night, Eleanor would dream of Ashford Manor. She would dream of the governess's room with its warning scratched into the wall. She would dream of the cellar with its terrible secrets. She would dream of Mrs. Ashford's cold eyes and Mr. Pike's cruel smile. She would dream of screaming in the night and of smoke and flames. But she would also dream of Bessie's tears of joy when she received her freedom papers, of Thomas choosing compassion over cruelty, of 23 people walking away from bondage toward lives of their own making, of justice, imperfect but real, finally being served. The manor fell into ruin eventually, torn down and rebuilt as Thomas had wanted, but Eleanor kept a piece of brick from its walls, a reminder of what she'd survived and witnessed. A reminder that bearing witness to evil is not enough, that those who have the power to speak must speak, and those who can act must act, no matter the cost. Because in the end, Eleanor had learned the most important lesson of all, that freedom is not just the absence of chains, but the courage to break them, and that sometimes the dead need the living to speak for them, to tell their stories, to ensure their suffering was not meaningless. She had taught the dead to speak through her testimony, through her writings, through her refusal to be silenced. She had given voice to the voiceless and brought light to hidden darkness. And though the lesson had nearly damned her, in the end it had saved not just her own soul, but the souls of everyone who heard the truth and chose to act on it. Ashford Manor was gone, but its story lived on as a warning and a call to action. Evil exists in the world, Eleanor would tell audiences in her lectures. It thrives in places where people look away, where they choose comfort over courage, silence over truth. But it can be stopped. It must be stopped. One person, one act of courage, one moment of refusing to be complicit, that's all it takes to begin. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to change everything.